Hi, my name is Brittany King, and I serve as the Senior Marketing Associate for the National Benevolent Association. I'm so excited to introduce this video series to you. I sat down with Dr. Norma Ellington Twitty and Reverend Monica Wedlock Kilpatrick for a dynamic conversation about NBA's history, equity and inclusion, leadership, and the importance of NBA's work both inside and outside the walls of the church. This video also marks a bit of a passing of the torch moment. In 1985, Dr. Twitty became the first Black woman to serve in a leadership role at NBA. She was the VP of Program Planning and Evaluation. Monica and Norma get into this more during their discussion, but Norma's time at NBA opened the door for other women of color to see themselves working at NBA as well, including Reverend Kilpatrick, who joined NBA in 2015 and now serves as the VP of Organizational and Leadership Development. I am so excited for you all to watch and hear this conversation, and I really hope you enjoy it.
So as Black women, we have unique experiences, identities, skill sets that we bring to really any room we walk in, but I would say especially professionally. Can you two talk about how you've approached your work at NBA, and I guess also within Disciples, if that feels relevant, through that particular lens? And Norma, we'll start with you.
You know, in a number of my positions, I was the first Black psychologist, and of course at NBA, I was the first African-American exec in an executive position. That federally funded Green Book project, which was highly competitive, over 200 applications and just 5 were awarded. I was the only African-American. And I know that when I approached any of these positions, I didn't approach them through the lens of being an African-American woman. For me, first and foremost, I think of myself as a highly qualified person who happens to be an African-American woman. When I was growing up, we were told that we had to be twice as competent as our white counterparts, and that if we functioned with excellence, we would earn respect and advance in our careers. And I pretty much found that to be true. So I was not necessarily seeing my unique experiences as an African-American, certainly as a primary role for me. Now, if it were necessary to say something that would help people be more aware that was either covertly or overtly racist or whatever, and there were times when this was part of my job description, of course. But in terms of my personae, I was a psychologist. I was whatever my title was, and I wanted to earn the respect of people based on that. I also felt that if I played the race card, I had to be strategic in when and how I played it. Because if I played it all the time, people wouldn't hear me on any subject. I would be, oh, there she goes about race. So it was a very difficult line. It was a very difficult atmosphere in the world. And I felt that my role was to a highly competent professional, a team player. That was always important to me. And always, 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 I was very mission driven. And it was always, how can I function in a way that's going to benefit the people we're serving? Even when I worked for the federal government on that domestic violence project, I considered that a calling. These were God's children who were being terribly mistreated, not by just the abusers, but by the institutions that were trying to help them. So this was more than just a job for me. And so the primary mission, my professionalism, that was where I was.
Yeah, as a Black woman, and similarly to Norma, I don't always think of, I guess in this heightened situation, in this heightened world we're in, I think of my work as a Black woman, but I think of myself as a professional first. But I think the thing that I learned, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, at my former work and my own experiences, is creating opportunity and sharing the knowledge that I didn't know, and especially the knowledge I didn't know, potentially because I was a Black woman or because I was a person of color, right? Folks have privilege, folks have information and networks that you don't necessarily have in your life and experiences. And so as I learned those things, as I experienced those things, as I made new connections, sharing all of that with those that came along behind me. Here in Georgia for a while, I served on the Commission on Ministry while I was serving at the seminary. And so that was a really great fit for me. But it also meant helping to coach folks through that process, and particularly folks of color through that process that may not have been the norm for them, or they didn't have the connections. Many of the persons of color that I know, Black folks that I know here in Disciples, did not start out Disciples, aren't cradled disciples. I wasn't. And so I knew there were some different kinds of waters I had to navigate just to learn the denomination, learn its history, learn who folks were. And so as I did that, I tried to share that with others. One, so they didn't have to make whatever mistakes I made, but also they had much more in their toolbox to assist them into wherever God was calling them to. So I think that's always been my philosophy and my ways of working. And it was in particular, it particularly showed up in those spaces. And I think I try to carry that into my work now, even with MBA. I think to your second question, or part of that question, Brittany, about what if anything has changed, right? Or how intentional. I don't know. I think as a Black woman, I'm not more intentional than I ever was before. I think it's always been a part of how we have to live ourselves into this world. I think what has changed is I'm more intentional as the mother of a Black child. As the mother of a Black child, and a Black boy in particular, but as a Black child, a mother of a Black child, I'm more intentional about the conversations that we are having across MBA, across with our partners, partner ministries and folks, because I recognize the impact that it can have on his life, the future, hopefully that he can have that perhaps, many of us didn't have, or the differences between, as Norma was leading in this position to now leading in this position. I hope it's different for him. Right? Even better that some of the conversations that we have to have now, we don't have to have. I'm thankful that I work in a space, I serve in a space where I can have those, but I hope that for him, that's not the conversation he has to have, right? So I think that's what the intentionality I have is because I'm a Black mother of a Black child, and I want that future to be different.
I want to bring some levity to the conversation. And just hoping you all can share how you take care of yourselves. What do you do outside of work that brings you joy?
I've been blessed to have a very full life. I have a number of circles of friendship and influence, exercise buddies, Bible study buddies, book club buddies, sorority buddies, all these circles that I have for social engagement. Of course, the pandemic changed some of those things, but it forced us to use Zoom. There was a time I was afraid of Zoom. Now Zoom is my friend. So we do wonderful things together. But as I was saying to Brittany, I just try to live as low stress a life as possible and surround myself with people who share my values and my likes. The golden sorors of my sorority just had a special project of recording books for young children. And those recordings are going to South Africa. And some of us just love this project. Of course, I saw Desmond Tutu when he came to the General Assembly back in the 80s and just filled the place with his love and exuberance, and of course, Nelson Mandela. But to think I can sit in this study, low stress, read a book, and yet touch a child in South Africa. Of course, at my age, you spend a whole lot of time on maintenance of your physical health. So I do try to see my doctors regularly and before things get bad. So I've had some health challenges, but I've come through them. And I feel very blessed again and having a very fulfilling life.
Yeah, that physical, emotional, mental maintenance piece, Norma, is so so critical. And this year, if it didn't teach us anything else, it taught us those things. More importantly, Brittany, it is the physical piece, but that physical piece also works on your mental, works on your emotional. Let some of those thoughts and things that you're holding on to out, or you have another space to let stress out. And so that's just been a wonderful commitment that I've been able to make to living here and trying to care for self and care for family. I think the other thing is learning how to shut off over the weekend for the most part. For the most part, to actually, when Friday evening comes, to shut down and to be present as I can be with my family for the weekend, has been a joy. And that's a practice. You have to practice not thinking about what's the next thing I'm supposed to be doing, and to enjoy the moment. And so I think that that's one of the things I've learned over this pandemic season, is to stop and enjoy what's happening in the moment. Tomorrow will be tomorrow, or the task list will be there, and I'll get through it. I'm committed to it. But I don't want to miss these moments. And so that's been the self-care piece.
And so I wonder, what is one piece of advice that you'd give young women, specifically Black women, who are kind of coming up in the denomination and are hoping maybe to see themselves in a general ministry, or planning their own church, or just locally within a congregation? What advice would you give them in navigating some of those tough spaces?
I thought this was a great question, because it's all about passing the torch and always being cognizant of the new generation and the possibilities. As I said, I never dreamed I could be a psychologist and find a career like the one I found at NBA. So I would tell African American girls and boys, the sky is the limit in terms of what you can aspire to be, in terms of employment within this denomination. You can be an accountant. You can be a social worker, business major, a journalist. Typically, we think of people being ordained ministers. And of course, you are, Monica. But I was a lay person at NBA. Rick Lance was a lay person. So anyway, I think it's important to start early, and exposure is just so important. Monica would be a lovely mentor for these girls and boys we're talking about. I think it's important that young people be connected to mentors. I couldn't begin to express how meaningful it was for me to be able to work for my church. It was just something I thought only ordained people could do. And I would like to see other young people experience that joy. And also, I would love to see an institution like NBA and other general ministries benefit from the genius of people like Monica and so on. So it's a win-win situation. It's a win-win.
There's not much to add to that, I think what I would say is, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it can't happen. or don't count yourself out, right? As Norma said, the sky is the limit. Don't count yourself out. If there's an invitation to do something you've never done before, just try it.
Yes.
Just try it. It may not, the environment may not look the way you think it should look. It may not have the kinds of people that you think it should have. And yet, I truly believe in the Holy Spirit and the Holy Spirit's presence, calling us and beckoning us into new adventures and new spaces. And you could be the one. If there were not a Norma, there would not be a Monica, right? And so you could be the one as well, that if it were not a you, there might not be someone else coming behind you, following in your footsteps. And so I think that's what I would encourage young people or people, and in particular, Black women and Black men, that just step into it, take the opportunity.